Crown Princess Alindra of the Valorian Empire had never known fear until the moment her shuttle began to fall from the sky. The explosion came without warning, and it tore through the elegant diplomatic vessel like a predator ripping through flesh, sending sparks and flame cascading through the cabin as alarms screamed their desperate warnings into the chaos. She remembered the faces of her guards in that final moment before impact, their eyes wide with the knowledge that they could not save her, that they could not save themselves, that everything they had trained for meant nothing against the laws of gravity and fire. Then came the crash. When Alindra opened her eyes, she found herself hanging upside down in the wreckage, her safety harness the only thing keeping her from falling into the twisted metal below. And for a long moment she simply hung there, listening to the sounds of the dying ship as it groaned and settled into whatever ground had caught. She cut herself free and fell hard onto what had once been the ceiling, her royal robes torn and stained with blood that she hoped was not entirely her own, and she crawled through the shattered remains of the shuttle until she found open air. The jungle that greeted her was unlike anything she had ever seen. Trees rose hundreds of meters into a green-black sky, their trunks wider than buildings, their branches tangled together in a canopy so thick that only scattered beams of sickly light reached the forest floor. And everywhere she looked, there was movement, shadows shifting between the massive roots, sounds echoing from directions she could not identify. She knew where she was. Corvette 7. The name alone was enough to make seasoned warriors grow pale, for this world had earned its classification as an extinction-grade biosphere through countless deaths, countless failed expeditions, countless warnings broadcast to every ship that passed through. This sector of space, no Valorian had ever survived more than 2 days on its surface. Alindra forced herself to stand, and she walked back to the wreckage to search for survivors. But what she found instead were bodies, broken and still, her entire delegation reduced to cooling flesh among the twisted metal. Commander Veth, who had served her family for 60 years, lay with his eyes open and empty. Young Lieutenant Sora, who had been so nervous about her first diplomatic mission, would never see her home again. The pilot whose name Alindra had never learned had been crushed by the console he had fought so hard to control. She was alone. The princess gathered what supplies she could find among the wreckage: a small emergency pack with rations for perhaps 3 days, a medical kit designed for minor injuries, a communicator that sparked and flickered when she tried to activate it, and a single light blade that felt impossibly small against the enormity of the jungle around her. Her emergency beacon was damaged but not destroyed, and she managed to coax a weak signal from its battered casing, though she had no way of knowing if that signal would reach anyone, if anyone would come, if anyone would arrive before this world claimed her, as it had claimed so many others. The first night was the longest of her life. She found shelter in the hollow of one of the giant trees, pressing herself into the narrow space as the temperature dropped and the jungle came alive with sounds that turned her blood to ice, roars and screams and wet tearing noises that spoke of violence she could not see but could imagine all too well. Something massive passed by her hiding spot in the darkness, its footsteps shaking the ground, its breathing hot and rank as it sniffed at the air, and Alindra pressed her hand over her mouth to keep from screaming, to keep from making any sound that might draw its attention. It moved on eventually. She did not sleep. The second day brought new horrors as she tried to move through the jungle, seeking higher ground, seeking any place where her beacon might broadcast more clearly. A plant that looked like a flower tried to eat her hand when she brushed against it. A creature with too many legs dropped from above, and she barely managed to slash it away with her light blade before its mandibles found her throat. The water in a stream she found was so toxic that it burned her fingers when she tested it. By the time the second night began to fall, Alindra had accepted that she was going to die on this world. She found another hollow tree, and crawled inside, too exhausted to care about the insects that crawled across her skin, too broken to flinch at the distant sounds of predators hunting in the darkness. As she closed her eyes and waited for the end to find her, that was when she heard the voice. "Do not move," it said, soft and calm and utterly out of place in this nightmare. "Do not breathe, and whatever you do, do not run." Her eyes snapped open, and she saw a figure dropping silently from the canopy above, landing in a crouch just outside her hiding spot, wrapped in rough handmade clothing fashioned from materials she did not recognize. Face hidden behind a mask that seemed to be carved from bone. The figure held up one hand in a gesture of silence, and Alindra obeyed, frozen in place as the sounds of something huge grew closer and closer. She could see it now through the gaps in the tree, a predator the size of a small shuttle, all teeth and claws and hungry eyes that gleamed in the faint light, and it was sniffing at the ground, following a trail that led directly to her location. The masked stranger did not move. The creature came closer. Alindra felt tears streaming down her face as she waited for death. And then the predator stopped, lifted its head, sniffed once more at the door, and turned away, disappearing into the jungle as silently as it had come. The stranger waited until the footsteps faded completely before turning to face her. "You are very lucky," the stranger said, and though the voice was muffled by the mask, Alindra could hear something almost like amusement in it. That was a Corveth Alpha, and they do not usually give up so easily. "Who are you?" Alindra whispered, her voice cracking from thirst and fear and exhaustion. "Someone who has learned how to survive on this world," the stranger replied, extending a hand toward her. "The question is whether you want to learn as well, or whether you would prefer to stay here and wait for the next predator to find you." Alindra looked at the offered hand, at the impossible figure standing before her, at the jungle that had tried so hard to kill her. She took the hand and let the stranger pull her to her feet. "Follow me," the stranger said, already moving into the darkness with a confidence that seemed almost supernatural. "Stay close, step where I step, and do not make any sudden movements." Alindra followed. She did not know where they were going, or who this mysterious rescuer was, or how anyone could possibly survive on a world that killed everything it touched. But she followed anyway, because the alternative was death, and despite everything that had happened, despite the hopelessness that had consumed her just moments ago, some small part of her still wanted to live. The jungle swallowed them both, and the night grew deeper, and somewhere in the distance, a predator screamed its frustration at losing its prey. Alindra kept walking, and she did not look back. They walked through the darkness for what felt like hours, and Alindra lost track of time as she focused all her remaining energy on following the stranger, on stepping exactly where the stranger stepped, on not falling behind even as her legs screamed for rest and her lungs burned with each breath. The masked figure moved through the jungle like a ghost, ducking under branches before Alindra even saw them, stepping over roots that seemed to reach for their feet, pausing at moments that seemed random until some danger passed by unseen in the shadows. Once the stranger pulled her suddenly behind a massive trunk and clamped a hand over her mouth, and Alindra heard something slither past just meters away, something that hissed and clicked and smelled like death itself. And when it was gone, the stranger simply nodded and kept moving. Finally they reached a cliff face that rose from the jungle floor like a wall of stone, and the stranger led her to what appeared to be solid rock until they pushed aside a curtain of hanging vines and revealed a hidden entrance. The cave beyond was not just a cave. It was a home. Alindra stared in amazement at what the stranger had built in this impossible place. A shelter reinforced with salvaged metal and native materials, lit by small glowing containers that cast warm light across walls lined with tools and weapons and supplies. There were water containers and food stores, and a sleeping area covered in furs from animals that must have been hunted and killed by hand. There were weapons everywhere, spears and knives and traps, all of them handmade, all of them showing signs of heavy use. There was even a small fire pit with ventilation carved into the ceiling to carry away the smoke. "You have been here for a long time," Alindra said softly, her voice filled with wonder. The stranger moved to secure the entrance before turning to face her and finally reaching up to remove the bone mask. The face beneath was female. She was young by Valorian standards, perhaps the equivalent of late 20s in their years, with skin darkened by sun and wind, with eyes that held a sharpness Alindra had never seen before, with scars crossing her features like a map of violence survived. She was small, shorter than Alindra by a full head, with a compact build that seemed to be made entirely of lean muscle and hard angles. She moved with a grace that reminded Alindra of the predators outside, controlled and efficient and always ready. 4 years, the stranger said, setting aside the mask and moving to one of her supply caches. "I crashed here 4 years ago." Alindra felt her mind struggle to process this information. 4 years on an extinction-grade world. 4 years on a planet that killed trained soldiers in days. 4 years alone in a nightmare that had nearly broken Alindra in just 2 days. "Impossible," the princess whispered. "No species could survive that long on Corvette 7. The stranger smiled, and there was no warmth in it, only a grim acknowledgement of a truth that went beyond words. "And yet here I am," she said, pulling out packages of dried meat and some kind of vegetable that she had clearly cultivated herself. "I am Cass, and you need to eat before you collapse." Alindra took the offered food and ate without tasting it, her eyes never leaving the woman who called herself Cass. This impossible survivor who had somehow tamed a world that was supposed to be untamable. "How?" she asked between bites. "How have you done this?" Cass sat across from her and began working on one of her weapons, checking its edge with practiced fingers. "The first month was the hardest," she said, her voice taking on a distant quality, as if she was recalling memories she had tried to forget. "My ship went down in the southern swamps, and I was the only one who survived the crash. And I spent those first weeks running, hiding, learning what would kill me and what would keep me alive." She held up the knife she was working on and examined it in the light. "I learned that the blue fruits are poison, but the red ones are safe. That the rivers flow north in the morning and south at night. That the alpha predators hunt by smell, so you can mask your scent with certain plants. That fire keeps most things away, but attracts others. That you have to sleep in short bursts, because nothing on this world sleeps for long." She looked at Alindra with those sharp eyes. "I learned that fear is useful, but panic is death. That every day is a fight. That giving up is not an option, because the alternative is being eaten alive." Alindra shook her head slowly. "But 4 years," she said. 4 years of this. Every day. Never safe. Never able to rest. How did you not go mad?" Again her voice was softer. "I had something to live for," she said. "I had people back home waiting for me. People who would never know what happened to me if I died on this rock. And I refused to let this place take me from them." She stood and moved to a small container that sat apart from the others, and when she opened it, Alindra saw something that made her breath catch. Photographs. Actual physical photographs, worn and creased from being handled countless times, showing faces that smiled at the camera, a family frozen in a moment of happiness. "My mother," Cass said, touching one of the images gently. "My brother and his wife and their children who I have never met. My dog who is probably too old now to remember me. My home." She closed the container and turned back to Alindra. "So I survived, because the alternative was unacceptable." The princess studied this remarkable woman, and felt something shift inside her chest, a respect she had rarely felt for anyone outside her own family. "Tomorrow we will begin moving north," Cass said, returning to her practical demeanor. "There is a plateau about 12 days' journey from here where your beacon will have a better chance of reaching your people. The terrain is harsh but manageable if you follow my lead." "You would guide me?" Alindra asked. "You would risk yourself for someone you do not even know?" Cass tilted her head, and something like surprise flickered across her features. "Why would I not?" she asked. "You are alive, and you need help, and I am able to provide that help. What other reason would I need?" Alindra had no answer for that. In her world, in the courts of the Valorian Empire, nothing was given without expectation of return. Every kindness was calculated, every gesture carried hidden meaning. But this woman, this impossible survivor, seemed to operate by different rules entirely. "Rest," Cass said, gesturing toward the sleeping area. "You will need your strength for what is coming, and I will keep watch tonight." "You do not sleep?" Another grim smile. "Not much, not anymore. My body learned to survive on less, another adaptation to this lovely paradise." Alindra lay down on the furs and found them surprisingly comfortable. And despite her racing thoughts and lingering fears, she felt exhaustion pulling her down into darkness. The last thing she saw before sleep took her was Cass sitting by the entrance, a weapon in her hands, her eyes fixed on the night beyond, with the patience of someone who had spent 4 years waiting for danger to come. Waiting and surviving, always surviving. Alindra slept, and for the first time since the crash, she did not dream of death. The journey north was nothing like Alindra had expected. She had thought that with a guide who knew the terrain, they would move quickly and safely, avoiding the dangers that had nearly killed her in those first terrible days alone. She was wrong. The jungle of Corvette 7 did not become less dangerous simply because Cass knew its secrets. It became more dangerous because they were moving through territory that Cass had learned to avoid, crossing regions that even the impossible survivor had marked as deadly. But there was no other path to the northern plateau, and so they walked. On the 3rd day, Alindra watched Cass kill a predator. It came at them from the undergrowth without warning, a creature of muscle and teeth that moved faster than anything that size should be able to move. Alindra barely had time to scream before Cass was between her and the beast. What happened next would stay with the princess forever. Cass did not run, did not freeze, and she did not panic. She moved. It was not the elegant combat that Valorian warriors practiced in their training halls, all flowing movements and precise strikes, meant to look beautiful while remaining deadly. It was brutal and efficient, and utterly without mercy. Cass ducked under the creature's first lunge and drove her spear into its side, then rolled away as it thrashed, pulling a knife from her belt and waiting for the moment when the beast turned toward her again. When it charged, she stepped aside at the last possible second, and her blade found its throat. The predator fell and did not rise again. Cass stood over its body, breathing hard but not panicked, her eyes already scanning for other threats, her hands already cleaning her weapons. "We need to move," she said calmly. "The blood will draw others." On the 5th day, Alindra watched Cass eat something that should have killed her. They had run out of the safe food supplies, and Cass had foraged from the jungle itself, selecting plants and fungi that Alindra would never have dared to touch. "This one is mildly poisonous," Cass explained as she chewed on a purple root. "But my body has learned to process the toxins. It took months of small doses to build up a tolerance, but now I can eat almost anything on this world." "That is not how biology works," Alindra protested. "Species do not simply adapt to poisons through exposure." Cass shrugged and kept eating. "My species does." On the 7th day, Alindra watched Cass run. A pack of hunters had found their trail, and there were too many to fight. Cass told Alindra to climb high into a tree and wait. "What are you going to do?" the princess demanded. Lead them away, Cass said, and then she was gone, sprinting through the jungle faster than Alindra could track. And the pack followed her, their howls fading into the distance. Alindra waited in that tree for 6 hours, certain that Cass was dead, certain that she was alone again, certain that this time there would be no rescue. And then Cass returned, jogging out of the jungle as the first light of dawn touched the canopy. Barely winded, despite having led a pack of apex predators on a chase that lasted most of the night. "How?" Alindra demanded as she climbed down. "How are you still alive?" Cass took a long drink of water and considered the question. "I am good at running," she said simply. "My kind evolved as persistence hunters. We do not chase prey down quickly like those things back there. We follow it for hours, for days if we need to, until it collapses from exhaustion. And somewhere along the way, our bodies learn to keep going long after other species would stop." On the 9th day, Alindra watched Cass heal. They had encountered a venomous insect, one that had stung Cass on the arm before she could crush it, and the wound swelled, blackened within minutes. Alindra prepared herself for the worst, remembering the warnings about Corvette 7's countless deadly creatures. But Cass simply cut open the wound with her knife, squeezed out as much venom as she could, and bound it with leaves that she said had healing properties. "You need medical attention," Alindra insisted. "That sting should be fatal." "Probably," Cass agreed. "But I have been stung by worse and survived. My body will fight it off." And it did. By the next morning the swelling had gone down and the blackness was fading, replaced by healthy pink flesh that was already starting to scar over. Alindra stared at the healing wound and felt something cold settle in her chest. "What are you?" she whispered. "What species could possibly survive all of this?" Cass was quiet for a long moment, her eyes fixed on some distant point that Alindra could not see. "I have been avoiding that question," she finally said, "because I know how people react when they hear the answer." "I deserve to know," Alindra pressed. "You have saved my life a dozen times on this journey. You have shown me things that should not be possible, and I cannot keep pretending that you are simply a more resilient version of the species I know." Cass turned to look at her, and there was something vulnerable in her expression now, something that Alindra had not seen before. "My people call ourselves human," she said, "and we come from a world called Earth." The name hit Alindra like a physical blow. Human, Earth. She knew those words. Every species in the galaxy knew those words, spoken in whispers, discussed in classified briefings, recorded in files that were not meant to be shared with the general public. "That is not possible," Alindra breathed. "Humans are confined to their home system. The Galactic Council established a quarantine centuries ago. My survey ship was one of the last to leave before the borders closed completely. We were supposed to chart new systems for future exploration, but then we crashed here, and the future became something very different." Alindra stared at the woman before her, this impossible creature from a world that the galaxy had deemed too dangerous to unleash upon the stars. "Why?" she asked. "Why was your kind quarantined?" Cass smiled, and it was sad and knowing and tired all at once. "Because the Council looked at us and saw what we could become," she said. "They saw a species forged by a world almost as hostile as this one, a species that had survived ice ages and plagues and mass extinctions and wars that killed millions of our own kind. A species that refuses to give up, no matter how impossible the odds." She gestured at the jungle around them. "They saw a species that could survive this, and they were afraid of what else we might survive." At Cass with new eyes. Not a survivor, not merely someone who had beaten the odds. A human, a species that the galaxy itself had tried to contain. And now that human was leading her to safety, expecting nothing in return, simply because it was the right thing to do. We should keep moving, Cass said, standing and gathering her gear. We are close now. Just a few more days. Alindra nodded and followed, her mind spinning with questions she did not know how to ask. But one thought rose above all others as she watched this human woman lead her through the death world with casual confidence. If this was what one human could do alone on a nightmare planet, what could they do together? That night, they made camp in a cave that Cass had scouted ahead, a small dry space that offered protection from the creatures that hunted in the darkness. And as they sat around a tiny fire that Cass had built with practiced ease, Alindra found herself unable to stop staring at her companion. Human. The word kept echoing in her mind, carrying with it all the stories and warnings and fears that she had absorbed throughout her life as the crown princess of the Valorian Empire. She remembered the briefings she had attended as part of her education, the classified files that detailed everything the galaxy knew about the species called humanity. Earth was a Class 12 death world, one of the most hostile environments ever discovered, that still managed to produce intelligent life. The planet itself seemed designed to kill, with extreme temperature variations, predators at every level of the food chain, natural disasters that could wipe out entire populations, diseases that evolved faster than medicine could cure them, and a biosphere so competitive that survival required constant struggle. And the humans had not merely survived on this nightmare world. They had thrived. They had conquered every environment their planet could offer, from frozen wastelands to scorching deserts to crushing ocean depths, adapting and innovating and refusing to accept any limitation that nature tried to place upon them. They had tamed fire and used it to reshape their world. They had split the atom and harnessed the power of stars. They had reached into the void of space, not through careful methodical advancement over millennia, like other species, but through strapping themselves to controlled explosions and launching themselves toward the unknown with nothing but hope and determination. The Galactic Council had watched humanity's rise with growing concern, seeing in them a species that displayed traits that no other civilization possessed: persistence beyond reason, adaptability beyond comprehension, aggression that could be turned toward creation or destruction with equal intensity, and most troubling of all, an emotional capacity that made them unpredictable, capable of acts of tremendous violence and tremendous compassion in equal measure, driven by bonds of loyalty and love that could override logic and self-preservation. The Council had debated for decades before finally deciding that humanity was too dangerous to release upon the stars. Not evil, not malicious, simply too powerful to predict, too resilient to control, too passionate to contain once they learned what the galaxy had to offer. So they had established the quarantine, sealing Earth and its solar system away from the rest of the galaxy, officially classifying humanity as a developing hazard to be monitored but not contacted. And now, Alindra was sitting across a fire from one of these legendary creatures, watching her sharpen a knife made from bone, realizing that everything the Council had feared was true. "You are thinking about the quarantine," Cass said without looking up. Alindra blinked, surprised at being read so easily. "How did you know?" "Because everyone who learns what I am thinks about the quarantine," Cass replied. "They wonder if the Council was right to fear us. They wonder if I am secretly dangerous. They wonder if helping me was a mistake." She looked up, and her eyes caught the firelight. "So let me save you some time. Yes, we are dangerous. Yes, we are capable of terrible things. And yes, the Council was probably right to be concerned about what we might do if we spread across the galaxy unchecked." Alindra felt her hand move toward the light blade at her belt, an instinctive response to perceived threat. Cass noticed and smiled sadly. "But we are also capable of great kindness," she continued. "We form bonds that last lifetimes. We sacrifice ourselves for strangers. We build and create and dream of futures that seem impossible. And we have spent most of our history fighting against our own worst impulses, trying to become better than the violence our world taught us. She set down the knife and held out her hands, showing Alindra the scars and calluses that covered them. "These hands have killed," she said simply. "On this world I've killed more than I can count, predators and prey and everything in between, because that was what survival required." She turned her hands over, revealing different marks, older and fainter. "But before I came here, these hands helped build homes for people who had none. These hands held children who were scared and sick. These hands planted gardens and cooked meals and created art that made people smile. These hands saved lives." She let her hands fall. "We are both things, Your Highness. We are the violence that our world demanded, and the compassion that we chose despite that violence. And the Council was right to be wary, but wrong to think that containment was the answer." Alindra slowly moved her hand away from her weapon. "Why wrong?" she asked. "Because you cannot cage a species like mine forever," Cass said. "We are too curious, too determined, too stubborn to accept limits that others place upon us. Sooner or later we will break free, and when we do, it would be better for the galaxy if we had friends waiting for us, rather than enemies." She leaned back and looked at the cave ceiling. "I have had 4 years to think about this. 4 years alone with nothing but my thoughts and my survival. And what I have realized is that humanity needs the galaxy as much as the galaxy needs humanity." "The galaxy does not need you," Alindra said, though the words felt hollow even as she spoke them. "Does it not?" Cass asked. "How many worlds have been conquered by the Syndicate slavers? How many species have been wiped out by plagues that your scientists could not cure? How many impossible problems remain unsolved because the species of the galaxy have grown comfortable in their power and forgotten how to struggle?" She met Alindra's eyes. "My kind does not forget how to struggle. We cannot. It is written in our blood, and that struggle makes us very good at solving impossible problems." Alindra thought about the syndicate that had sabotaged her shuttle, the criminal empire that had grown so powerful that even the Valorian Empire could not destroy it. She thought about the death worlds that remained unconquered across the galaxy, rich in resources, but impossible to colonize. She thought about the wars that had been fought for centuries without resolution, the diseases that killed millions, the challenges that no species had been able to overcome. And she thought about the woman sitting across from her, single human, who had conquered an extinction-grade world through nothing but determination and refusal to die. "What would you do?" Alindra asked. "If you were free, if the quarantine was lifted, what would your people do?" Cass was quiet for a long moment. "Some would cause trouble," she admitted. "We are not a perfect species, and we have our share of those who would use freedom to harm others." She smiled, and it was the first genuine smile Alindra had seen from her. "But most would do what humans always do. We would explore and build and dream. We would make friends with species we have never met. We would fall in love with worlds we have never seen. We would find impossible problems and refuse to stop until we solved them." She reached into her pack and pulled out the container with her photographs. "And we would go home to the people we love and tell them about the wonders we had seen." Alindra looked at the photos of Cass's family and felt something shift inside her. Not fear, not wariness, something closer to hope. "We should rest," she said finally. "Tomorrow we reach the plateau." Cass nodded and put away her photographs, and for the rest of the night neither of them spoke. But as Alindra drifted towards sleep, she found herself thinking not about the dangers of humanity, but about the possibilities. And for the first time since learning the truth, she was not afraid. The northern plateau rose from the jungle like a monument to survival, its rocky surface bare of the deadly vegetation that covered everything else on Corvette 7, its elevation high enough that the worst predators could not reach it. Alindra and Cass climbed the final stretch together, their bodies exhausted from 12 days of constant movement through terrain that should have killed them 100 times over. And when they finally stood at the summit and looked out over the endless green hell that stretched to every horizon, Alindra felt tears running down her face. They had made it. Cass activated the emergency beacon, and its signal pulsed out into the void, stronger now, without the jungle canopy to block it, reaching up toward the stars where someone might be listening. "Now we wait," Cass said, sitting down on a flat rock and pulling out the last of their rations. Alindra sat beside her, and together they watched the sky. "What will happen when they come?" Cass asked, her voice carefully neutral. Alindra understood what she was really asking. What would happen to a human found outside the quarantine, a representative of a species that the Galactic Council had deemed too dangerous for the rest of the galaxy? "I will not let them harm you," Alindra said firmly. "You saved my life. You protected me. You asked for nothing in return, and I am not the kind of person who repays such kindness with betrayal." Cass nodded, but did not look convinced. 6 hours later, the sky filled with ships. Valorian warships, dozens of them, their sleek forms cutting through the atmosphere like blades, their weapon systems powered and ready, their purpose clear to anyone who saw them. The Emperor of the Valorian Empire had mobilized half his fleet to find his daughter. The largest ship descended toward the plateau, and Alindra recognized it immediately as the royal shuttle, the personal vessel of her father. And she felt her heart begin to race as she prepared for what was to come. The shuttle landed, and soldiers poured out, elite guards in ceremonial armor that concealed weapons capable of leveling mountains. And behind them came a figure that Alindra had not seen in 2 years. Emperor Kael'thas of the Valorian Empire, her father, ruler of the most powerful stellar nation in the known galaxy. He was tall and ancient, and carried himself with the weight of centuries, his silver hair flowing behind him in the wind from the shuttle engines, his golden eyes scanning the plateau until they found what they were looking for. "Alindra," he breathed, and in that single word was more emotion than Alindra had heard from him in her entire life. She ran to him, and he caught her in his arms, and for a long moment they simply held each other, father and daughter, reunited against all odds. Then he pulled back and looked at her, studying her torn clothes and healing wounds, and changed eyes. "We feared the worst," he said. "When your beacon activated, we tracked it here, to this world of death, and we thought surely no one could have survived." "I would not have survived," Alindra replied, "not alone." She turned and gestured toward Cass, who had risen to her feet, but remained at a careful distance from the armed soldiers. "This woman saved me. She found me in the jungle and led me through 12 days of impossible terrain. She protected me from predators and taught me how to survive and ask for nothing in return." The Emperor studied the small, scarred figure in handmade clothes, and his eyes narrowed. "What is your name, stranger?" he asked. "And what species are you that you could survive on a world like this?" Alindra felt her breath catch in her throat. "Father," she said quickly, "before she answers, I need you to promise that you will hear me out, that you will not act until I have explained." "Everything?" The Emperor looked at his daughter, and something in her expression made him pause. "Very well," he said, "I promise." Cass stepped forward, and the soldiers tensed, their hands moving toward weapons that could end her life in an instant. "My name is Cassandra Morgan," she said, her voice steady, despite the danger. "And I am human." The silence that followed was absolute. Every soldier, every guard, every official who had accompanied the Emperor knew what that word meant, and Alindra watched their faces shift from confusion to recognition to fear. Weapons rose. "Wait!" Alindra shouted, stepping between Cass and the soldiers. "Father, you promised." The Emperor held up his hand, and the weapons stopped, though they did not lower. A human, he said slowly, here, outside the quarantine, with my daughter. She has been stranded on this world for 4 years, Alindra explained, speaking quickly before anyone could interrupt. Her ship crashed, and she has survived alone in a place that kills everything else. And when my shuttle went down, she did not hesitate to help a stranger. She did not ask who I was or what reward she might receive. She simply saw someone in danger and chose to help. She looked at her father with all the conviction she possessed. That is not the action of a monster. That is the action of someone good and brave and worthy of our gratitude. The Emperor was quiet for a long moment, his ancient eyes moving between his daughter and the human who stood behind her. The council will demand her arrest, he finally said. The quarantine is law. Then let them demand, Alindra replied. You are the Emperor of the Valorian Empire, and you bow to no one, not even the council, and this woman saved your only heir. She took a deep breath. She does not want power or territory or wealth. She wants only one thing, to go home, to see her family again. To return to the world that she was taken from 4 years ago. The Emperor looked at Cass. Is this true? He asked. You want only to return to Earth? Cass met his gaze without flinching. I have family waiting for me, she said. A mother who thinks I am dead, a brother I have not seen in years, a home I have dreamed of every night since I crashed on this rock. That is all I want, to hug them again, to tell them I love them, to sit in my own house and feel safe for the first time in 4 years. Her voice cracked slightly. I am tired of surviving, Your Majesty. I want to live. The Emperor studied her for a long moment, and Alindra saw something change in his expression, something softening behind the mask of imperial power. You have saved my daughter, he said finally. You have done what armies could not do, what the best warriors in my empire could not do. You kept her alive on a world that kills everything. Weapons finally lowered. The council may protest, but they can go to hell. You will return to Earth under my protection, and any who try to stop you will answer to the full might of the Valorian Empire. Cass closed her eyes, and Alindra saw tears streak down her scarred face. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you. As they boarded the shuttle, Alindra sat beside Cass and watched through the window as the nightmare jungle fell away beneath them. What will you do when you get home? She asked. Cass was quiet for a moment, then smiled. Everything, she said. I will do everything. I will see everyone I love, and eat food I have missed, and walk through streets without fear, and sleep in a bed without listening for predators. She laughed softly. And then maybe I will tell my people about what is out here, about the galaxy waiting beyond our quarantine, about the friends we might make if we were given the chance, and felt something that might have been the beginning of a great friendship. Maybe I will come visit you someday, she said. I would like to see Earth, the world that made someone like you. Cass grinned. I would like that. And as the shuttle rose toward the stars, Alindra thought about everything that had happened, about the crash, and the terror, and the impossible survival, about the woman who had saved her, and the species that the galaxy had tried so hard to contain. The Council had feared humanity because they could not be controlled. But perhaps, Alindra thought, the galaxy did not need to control them. Perhaps it just needed to befriend them. And that, she decided, was exactly what she intended to do.